essentially, and hi, I'm Allison, we're Teaching for Change.
I'm Elizabeth, and I'm Maria.
All right, welcome. So the kind of goal of this session was really, however you all may be thinking about what culturally responsive teaching advocacy might look like, wanted to sort of give you the foundational understanding of kind of what are we talking about and what you should be looking for. So this session is going to walk through the core concepts of multicultural education, anti-bias, and equity in education to give you foundation, analyze, critique, advocate for well-informed culturally responsive teaching policy strategies and resources. So let's just jump right in. Yes, so Teaching for Change. Hi, welcome. Come on in and have a seat, wherever you like. Oh, we've got more people, okay. I'm gonna stand up. Welcome everyone. Welcome. So, this session, as I was sharing with the group, is really designed to help give you all kind of a foundational understanding of what's at least behind, not so much what's behind culturally responsive teaching, but as you were thinking about it as a potential policy and advocacy area, what does it mean to be kind of well-informed so that you can sort of analyze, critique, and advocate for strong policies and practices. So, all right, so Teaching for Change, we are based here in DC. We are a partner with EmpowerEd, particularly through our DC Area Educators Project. Our tagline is Building Social Justice Starting in the Classroom, and predominantly our work comes through publications, including lessons, and our own books that we've published, including this, which was one of the guides for our time today, professional development, studio teacher workshops, and Parent Power, we have a family engagement project. So, DC Area Educators for Social Justice, so this is a network that we're cultivating really around what does it mean to teach for social justice? Like, what does that mean? What does that look like? So that's through events. We have an early childhood working group, anti-bias working group. We now have a middle and high school working group. So we hope that you will connect with us that way. And we also maintain a calendar of events, and actually a lot of institutions kind of partner with us to get the word out about opportunities for teachers. So we encourage you to, at the very least, sign up for the email list, check the calendar for good stuff that's going on. More about that. Our family engagement project, we actually partner with DC Public Schools, several DC Public Schools, primarily elementary schools, to do a family engagement approach that is using community organizing and these other pieces, racial equity, popular education, and actually the family engagement research, to take a different approach to how schools partner with families. But let's jump into our session today. So, briefly, we'll say 1 minute each with a partner. Just introduce yourselves. If you won yourself, not your kids, you, okay? So if you won an all-expenses paid trip to Greece, what would you do to prepare? So, turn to a partner, please, and introduce yourself. And yes, what would you do? Let's come up with a couple of things that you would do in advance of the trip.
Hi, I'm Lizzie.
I'm Elizabeth. Nice to meet you. Where are you with?
I teach at engineering prep, charter school engineering prep.
Great.
I was thinking I would probably learn some basic language. Hello, goodbye, how to order, things like that. Read a map a bunch, figure out where to go.
We're doing our exercise.
I think I would, in addition to this, I would want to learn things about food, I would like to figure out places that are not really touristy.
Also, disclaimer, I do not have an all-expenses paid trip to Greece to offer, just so we're clear.
Be where they are. I'd like to go to Greece.
Yeah, that sounds good.
What's the second aspect?
I think I would want to
there, actually visiting.
history.
Definitely, some basics at least.
Yeah, at least come with some questions.
But no, it was real.
Exactly, for sure.
Do you like very cool stuff?
All right, let's come back together as a group. Okay, so let's hear from a few folks. So things that came up in your conversation, let's try to hit 4 or 5. So something you would do if you want an all-expense paid trip to Greece to prepare for the trip. Anyone, go ahead and jump. Yes.
My my partner Alexis had a really good point that you should do research on how it will affect your taxes, just in case, which I haven't thought about.
Oh, you talking about like the
Yeah, if it's all expense paid.
you have like the Price is Right
how
money, you know.
You need to sell it, like, can we afford this?
I will definitely give you that point. Let's go other. Thinking about Greece itself.
That's the fifth one.
Yes. Okay. What's something that came up in your conversations?
Well, we talked about researching a lot of like excursions and restaurants and places to go.
Okay. So what to do locally, doing some research. Other folks, what are ways? I heard someone over here talking about language. Is that you? Yeah. Yeah. Please tell us. Yeah.
I think at least knowing some of the basic phrases so that when you walk into a restaurant you can say hello and order and not seem like a rude American.
Yeah, for sure.
Love that Duolingo.
Say that again.
Duolingo.
Oh, Duolingo.
Get prepped.
Okay. Anything else? One more to add to our list? Just another way you might prep if you got this for your trip. Yeah.
We talked about like the best time to go, like it's in, like the summer months, some really like activities.
Oh, so time of year, right? How does the experience change throughout the year? Okay. So those are all great ideas and great suggestions. Now I want you to think about a similar question, a different way. If you were going to teach in a school community with which you were not familiar, how would you prepare for that? No, so food, just because this is only like 25 minutes. So, but no, so just kind of food for thought to think about. And this actually is an exercise that Lisa Delpit does as one of her teacher prep training, right? So thinking about even the communities that we go into, right? How do we build connections with them? And wanting to set that up in this context of culturally responsive teaching. Just to think about, as we think about, kind of what does it mean? And again, this session, what we're going to jump into is really kind of picking apart what's the foundation for what we're really striving for when we're talking about culturally responsive teaching. So there's 3 things that we're going to walk through today. Multicultural is going to be kind of a pseudo-history lesson, but multicultural education, anti-bias education, and equity, how those relate to this conversation. So starting with multicultural education, one thing you should know, the history of it comes out of the modern civil rights movement of the 1960s. And so a lot of the foundations for this really were developed in the 70s and 80s. And I pulled this is from our book, Beyond Heroes and Holidays, where we actually collected a lot of these readings. So one I pulled out that I think is worth kind of sharing to set this up, just in understanding multicultural education, where it comes from. We believe multicultural education should help students, parents, teachers, administrators understand and relate to the histories, cultures, and languages of people different from themselves. But it must be more than that. It must be transformative. It is to encourage academic excellence that embraces critical skills for progressive social change. So the academic excellence piece is a part of multicultural education, being able to connect to and learn about people different from ourselves, and also to learn deeper about ourselves and see ourselves in the curriculum. But multicultural from education from the beginning was done in an anti-racist framework. That school is not just a place where students learn and sit to become the next factory workers, and they do not learn anything, they do not learn to think critically about the world around them and how they could push for the change to make their world and this country a better place. So that's one particular thing to know. In putting together the different lessons and readings that we have in this guide, I pulled this out because I thought this would help, but some examples of how this gets applied. Does the lesson draw on the knowledge and experience of the students? And also, as we go through this, you're going to hear kind of in each of these segments some similar language, so I want you to be listening for that. The diversity and complexity of issues. Does it use a variety of instructional methods? So we're talking about pedagogy. Reinforce the idea that students have individual and collective agency to help and develop that agency. Are students sitting in history class just thinking that they need to be waiting for the next Martin Luther King, or the next Barack Obama? This is what multicultural education is really challenging us to think about. Convey a politics of possibility and hope. Challenge stereotypes and correct misinformation about peoples of color. Expose the deep historical historical and institutional roots of racism and other forms of oppression. and the effects both on people of color and white people on oppressed and oppressors require recognition of racism and connections to other forms of inequality. So this is not expecting that every single lesson will check all of these, but this is sort of kind of guiding questions and thinking about how to approach multicultural education. I wanted to give, I'm not going to go through these, I wanted to just give a nod, especially if you have taken a course on multicultural education, Dr. James Banks, who really is one of the founders of this. So we don't have time to get into detail, but if this is something that you all choose to pursue, we have resources on this, and I wanted to absolutely acknowledge him. Sonia Nieto, who's a name that many may recognize, helped kind of move the multicultural education conversation before it and framing it as, you know, if we take kind of the typical history, particularly thinking about history, but other areas of, or other subjects as well. Really, we start from this kind of monocultural kind of indoctrination approach, where particularly students of color may not see themselves in their education. The next layer up of this is a combination of why we're doing this and what we're doing this is tolerance. Students should be able to tolerate each other. Not really the goal for our society that people can just tolerate each other. Also, I know even teaching tolerance acknowledges that their name, they actually have been looking at, do they switch it? Because this is not the goal. The goal that we're trying to get to is over here, where we can affirm each other and ourselves, where we can stand in solidarity with each other, and where we can critique the systems around us. So along with this multicultural education vein, you had the field of anti-bias education, which really did develop, this is in the 70s, and anti-bias education is specifically talking about early childhood. So the book that's the lead for this was written by Louise Dermot Sparks, Julie Olson Edwards, and there are 4 core goals of anti-bias education, and really with the idea that children, actually as early as 6 months, is when children start to perceive differences in skin color, right? So even young children are absorbing the messages, the stereotypes from media, from family, from everywhere. So how do we interrupt that early on? So there are 4 goals of anti-bias education. Children will demonstrate self-awareness, confidence, family pride, positive social identities, confident joy with human diversity, that they'll be able to talk about human differences, and develop caring connections, that they will recognize unfairness, have a language to describe unfairness, and understand that it hurts, and that they will demonstrate empowerment skills to act with others or alone against prejudice and or discriminatory actions. And one of the things I hope that you see is all of these, one of the common threads is at the highest level, there's an action component, right? So there's an action component for each of these. So teaching tolerance, actually, and I have an early version of this, just so you know. So you can find this on their site. They actually kind of expanded this out for, to go not just for early childhood, but actually all the way up through high school. So they actually have a very good, we do recommend that you look at it, standards for what they call it social justice, but essentially it's anti-bias for going all the way from kindergarten up through high school. And the standards and domains are really around 4 areas. So identity, diversity, justice, action. So again, you're hearing some of the common themes that you should be looking for when we're talking about anti-bias, multicultural, culturally responsive. And then really the conversation where we are kind of now in 2019 is really more so centered around equity. When we approach education through an equitable lens, through an anti-bias lens, when we do it well, it is culturally responsive teaching. But we like this definition from Enid Lee, who's one of the co-editors of this book. So equity, we're talking about those different and sometimes extra measures we undertake to address inequities in classroom environment, curriculum content, pedagogy, assessment, school-family relationships, hiring, professional development, teacher evaluation, and funding. And so again, if we address these things, particularly the culturally responsive teaching conversation really tends to hinge around these 2. But really we're talking about how do we interrupt systems of oppression. I actually like the term decolonize now. I like the phrase decolonize your classroom. And so this is another way to another part of the conversation that should be present when you're talking about what do you want to push for if you're talking about culturally responsive teaching. And then last thing we'll share for today, so Paul Gorski, who developed the equity literacy framework, and this is something that we really appreciate, and I feel like it's very accessible. We do a lot of coaching with principals on this. And so just as we have, with students we're working on math literacy, we're working on computer literacy, we talk about literacy, which we still didn't figure out. What is literacy called? Just literacy? Okay, literacy, right? Reading and writing literacy. That as educators, it's important for us to develop and cultivate our equity literacy. So can you even recognize the subtlest biases and inequities that are in your classroom materials, in your teaching methods, your pedagogy? Can you respond to biases and inequities in the immediate term, whether it's the student makes the comment or you look in the book and you say, oh my. Start looking at the pictures on your wall. Who is represented? Are your students represented in their classroom? To redress biases and inequities in the long term, and then really the ultimate goal is to create and sustain a bias-free and equitable learning environment. And I like this because for a number of people, a lot of people may feel like they're here, and the idea is that you need to strengthen, like this is something just like with math, just like with reading and with IT, this is something that we're working to strengthen. So as you consider what do you push for with regards to, or if that's something that you want to push for when you're talking about culturally responsive teaching, again, these are sort of the foundations, so you understand what you're looking at. Is this, because it's talked about in a lot of different ways, culturally responsive, culturally relevant teaching and curriculum, and I always have a lot of questions every time I hear that term. What are you actually talking about? So hopefully this gives you a sense of some of the kind of foundational pieces that you should use when you are analyzing and looking at whether it's a policy or something going on in your own school. Examples of how to connect to this, just immediate next steps to, again, shameless plug for our network, DC Educators for Social Justice. We do formally partner with EmpowerEd and do a lot of cross promotion. We will be gearing up again for the Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action. It's the first week of February, so look out for even more lessons. We collected a ton of teacher stories of how people put the 13 guiding principles into practice in their schools during the week. So that's also a big piece of what Teaching for Change is trying to do. We're trying to both share lessons, but also tell the stories of here's how this looks in practice. Social justice books, where you can go online for our book list, guides for using a critical literacy lens to analyze children's books, and we've got stuff that you can pick up there. One of the reasons for this is because the representation in children's books is still very poor, and this has gotten better over the years. This is a card that you can pick up on your way out, but if you can't see, for all children's books published in the United States in 2018, 50% of the lead characters were white, and so you can see all the different ways that the white children get to see them. So you got kings, queens, astronauts. Next highest category, 27% of the characters featured animals or something other. So this is your trucks, your cartoons, animals, and then you get to, this is higher than the sum of all of the representation for other kids of color. And I said in the last session, if you can unpack this more, but if you go here, if you take out, it used to be all the books about MLK and Rosa Parks, and so now I say if you take out all the Barack Obama and the Michelle Obama books, and the LeBron James books, and the Michael Jordan books, this probably drops a couple percentage points even lower. So this is why we are screening and cultivating recommended book lists, and we try to give out books when we can too. And for our high school folks, it's an education project, particularly for social studies and U.S. history. Central America, this has been our big push for September, October, to bring Central Americans into the classroom. They are sitting in our classrooms, most of the Latinos in DC, and in DC class, in DCPS at least, students are from Central America. No place carved out in the curriculum where they see themselves. So we try to bring these resources, and that's, I think, probably even more than the time I have for today. So I'm happy to stick around. Say what?
You're on time.
Oh, I am. Okay, great. So I'm happy to answer kind of any questions, anything that kind of popped up. So yeah, thank you.
This is great.